Why would a child choose poverty over privilege? The words snapped through the courtroom like a whip. Judge Hanley didn't look at me when he said it. He was scribbling something on his yellow legal pad, casual, like he hadn't just stripped me of all dignity in front of a room full of strangers. I felt the oxygen leave my lungs. Across the aisle, Darren adjusted the cuff of his $1,000 shirt and smiled like a man who knew the punchline to a joke no one else had caught yet. I wanted to scream, to explain how bedtime stories mean more than ballet classes, how Ariel's freckles light up when she laughs, how we spent an entire Sunday building a spaceship out of cereal boxes. But I stayed still. I'd learned that outbursts don't help women like me, single moms who work nights and live in buildings where the elevators groan louder than the tenants. Ariel sat beside me, legs too short for the bench, swinging gently. Her hair was pulled back into a lopsided braid I'd done at 6 a.m. after my third 12-hour shift. She was wearing her favorite sweatshirt with the peeling glitter unicorn. She didn't look at the judge. She looked at me. Darren's lawyer, a polished brunette named Allison Crowley, crossed her legs with performative grace. "Your Honor," she began, syrup in her tone, "Mr. Sloan only seeks what's in his daughter's best interest, a stable home, educational resources, emotional consistency." I could have laughed if it didn't feel like swallowing glass. Emotional consistency? The man who hadn't sent a single card on Ariel's 5th birthday was now advocating emotional stability? The man who used to leave mid-argument and vanish for days? Darren hadn't wanted to be a father when I told him I was pregnant. He'd said I was ruining both our lives. When he walked out, Ariel still in diapers, he didn't even leave a note. And now, because his startup had gone public and he wore the word founder like a crown, he wanted custody. Not shared. Full. "They live in a rent-controlled apartment with mold issues," Allison continued. "Miss Monroe's hours are erratic. Ariel is often left with unlicensed caregivers." "Elena is my neighbor," I cut in. My voice was calm, but my hands were shaking beneath the table. "She's watched Ariel since she was 2. She's practically family." Judge Hanley raised a brow, not amused by the interruption. Darren leaned forward, his voice smooth. "I'm not trying to take her away. I just want what's best for her. Jade works nights. Ariel deserves better." My blood boiled. "You mean she deserves richer?" He ignored that. They always ignore the truth when it's inconvenient. I could feel it all slipping. My confidence, my footing, the belief that the system might listen to a woman who can recite hospital codes faster than her own dreams. My lawyer, Daniel, placed a quiet hand on my arm, a silent reminder not to crumble. But it was already happening. Because the system doesn't reward mothers who are tired. It doesn't see the pancake mornings, the Band-Aids, the math homework on Post-it notes taped to the fridge. It sees income brackets and zip codes and the pristine photos Darren submitted, Ariel in a lace dress, in front of a grand piano she didn't even know how to play. That night, when I tucked Ariel into bed, she touched my cheek and whispered, "Do I have to go live with Daddy now?" "No, baby," I lied. "Everything's okay." But it wasn't. I cried into the pillow after she fell asleep, the kind of crying you do when you can't afford to be loud about it. I thought I'd hit bottom that day in court. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I was wrong. Because 3 days later, Ariel came home from Darren's place with a bruise on her wrist and a secret she was too scared to say out loud. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, clutching the pink iPad Darren had given her like it held the weight of her world. And that's when everything began to unravel. She stopped singing in the car. That was the first thing I noticed. My little girl, who used to belt out every word of A Million Dreams like it was her anthem, just stared out the window, silent, after her second weekend at Darren's. No hums, no kicks to the beat, just silence. By the third visit, she started hiding her stuffed animals. "Why is Mr. Bear in the hamper, baby?" I asked on a Friday afternoon, watching her wedge her favorite plush rabbit between a towel and an old hoodie. "So he's safe," she whispered, "in case I don't come back." I sat down on the bed beside her, feeling something inside me begin to tear, one slow thread at a time. You're always coming back, sweetheart. She didn't answer. The nightmare started after that. Short, sharp cries in the middle of the night, her tiny body tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, clinging to me like I was the last thing left. Sometimes she cried out for me. Sometimes she didn't say anything at all, just screamed like she was stuck in a place she couldn't get out of. Then came the accidents. Ariel hadn't wet the bed since she was 4, but suddenly her pajamas were damp, her voice small and ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't mean to." I held her close every time, told her it was okay, that she was safe. But deep down, I knew something wasn't. Her teacher, Mrs. Harlow, called me in one Thursday. "She's withdrawn," she said gently. "She doesn't play during recess anymore. Her drawings used to be so colorful. Now they're just black circles and stick figures behind fences." I stared at the papers she laid out in front of me. One had a figure with a red line across its mouth. Another had a little girl curled in the corner of a room with tall shadows looming over her. "Has anything changed at home?" she asked. Everything had changed. Darren had been pushing for more weekends, more time, more control. He brought Ariel back every Sunday night like he was returning a defective product. "She's being difficult," he'd say, sliding his Tesla keys into his pocket. "You should work on her behavior." Behavior? She used to twirl around the kitchen in socks and make up her own ballet routines. She used to laugh so hard milk would come out of her nose. Now she barely looked me in the eye. Even Elena, my neighbor and part-time miracle, started noticing. "She's jumpy," she said after babysitting one evening. "Flinches when I reach for her plate. That's not like her, Jade." I didn't want to see it, but I couldn't unsee it anymore. One night, as I brushed Ariel's hair and tried to hum our usual lullaby, she stopped me with a question that froze every muscle in my spine. "Is it bad to record someone if they scare you?" I dropped the brush. "Why do you ask that, baby?" She hesitated, just wondering. I forced a smile and kissed the top of her head. "We can talk about anything, okay? You don't have to hide anything from me." But she was already hiding everything. That same night, I checked her pink iPad, the one Darren gave her for learning apps. Nothing looked out of the ordinary. Homework folders, games, the usual. I didn't know that buried beneath an innocent file labeled math practice, there was a hidden folder. I didn't know what she'd seen, or worse, what she'd heard. Not yet, but I felt it, like static in the air before a lightning strike, and the bruise came next. "He told me to lie, Mommy, but I didn't want to." Ariel's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cracked something inside me open. We were sitting on her bedroom floor, surrounded by puzzle pieces and a half-finished drawing of a girl with no face. Her small fingers clutched the pink iPad like it was radioactive. She looked terrified, not of me, but of what she was about to show me. "I didn't know if it was wrong," she added, "so I saved it, just in case." She tapped through the screen with the precision of someone far too familiar with hiding. Then she opened a folder tucked inside another folder, disguised under schoolwork and spelling lists. Inside were 5 videos, all dated, all labeled homework. The first one started with a soft thud. Ariel had clearly propped the iPad under a blanket. The screen was crooked and dark, but the voices were unmistakable. "Darren, you need to say Mommy leaves you alone at night, that you feel scared." "But I'm not scared. I like when she's home." A loud slap against something, maybe a table. Then Whitney's voice chimed in, cold and sharp. "She's too young to understand nuance, Darren. Just make it simpler for her." Darren again, "Do you want to stay in that shoebox apartment forever? Or do you want your own room, a pool, real vacations? Then do what you're told." I felt my stomach turn. Ariel had been right there, recording everything with hands that probably shook the entire time. She'd known this wouldn't be believed unless it was seen. The second video showed them in the kitchen of their glass and marble house. Darren was pacing, agitated. "She's too attached to her mother," he said, like it was a disease. "We need full custody. Once we get it, we'll ship her to that boarding school in Zurich." Whitney didn't even flinch. "She's just a kid, Darren." "She's an inconvenience." I hit pause. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. Ariel was looking at me, wide-eyed and waiting. For what? I didn't know. Maybe for me to scream, to cry, to promise nothing bad would happen. But I couldn't promise that. Not anymore. I watched all 5 videos. In one, Whitney mocked Ariel's drawings, saying they looked like something drawn by a dog with a marker. In another, Darren snapped at her for refusing to say the exact line they'd rehearsed. My mom forgets to feed me sometimes. Ariel's voice, small and unsteady, had whispered, "That's not true." It didn't matter if the camera angle was bad. The audio was clear. The manipulation, the cruelty, the calculation, it was all there. By the 5th video, I wasn't angry anymore. I was something colder, sharper, focused. I called Mia first. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice like sandpaper. "Not someone to mediate, someone who knows how to burn it all down." She didn't even hesitate. "I know someone. Her name's Nadia Ray. She doesn't lose." 3 hours later, I was sitting in a small office above a bakery that smelled like lemon tarts. Nadia looked barely 30, with a nose ring and a legal pad filled with shorthand I couldn't read. Her mother had lost custody of her and her siblings when she was 9. She'd spent a year in the system before the courts reversed the ruling. "I don't take easy cases," she said, "but I take necessary ones." I handed her the iPad. "Watch everything." She did, without a single word or expression, just quiet note-taking, one eyebrow twitching upward when Darren mentioned Zurich. When the videos ended, she looked at me and said, "This isn't a case, it's a war, and I'm all in." The plan started that night. We documented every file, logged every timestamp, consulted a forensic tech to verify authenticity. Nadia prepped me like we were going into battle. And all the while, Ariel watched us from the hallway, hugging Mr. Bear so tight I thought his stitching might tear. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I didn't know it then, but Darren wasn't going to take this quietly. He was going to hit back. Hard. Those recordings are inadmissible. They were taken without consent by a minor, no less. Allison Crowley's voice rang out like she was delivering the final blow. Darren sat beside her, smug, arms crossed like a man already counting his victory. I could feel the tension in my chest, but Nadia didn't flinch. She stood slowly, heels clicking softly against the courtroom floor, like each step was a warning. "Your Honor," she said, calm but sharp, "there is precedent in this state. When a child is the victim or perceives threat within their home environment, and they are the only party able to provide evidence, their recordings can be deemed admissible, especially when the alternative is silence." Judge Hanley adjusted his glasses. "Continue." Nadia nodded. "This isn't a privacy dispute. This is a 7-year-old trying to be heard in a room full of adults determined to speak over her. She recorded those moments not out of malice but survival. And she did it using a device given to her by the very man trying to silence her." Crowley was already standing. "We object on the grounds of manipulation, parental coaching, entrapment." "No one coached her," Nadia interrupted. "Her voice in those videos is raw, scared, unrehearsed, and it's the only honest thing we've heard since this trial began." The courtroom stilled. Even the bailiff, who'd been half asleep, was watching now. Judge Hanley leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together. "The court will review the recordings in chambers. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. Darren's eyes flicked to me across the aisle. For the first time, there was no arrogance in them, just the flicker of something else. Fear, maybe. Recognition. We waited in a conference room that smelled like old paper and lemon-scented cleaner. Ariel sat on my lap, tracing invisible patterns on my palm. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. When the bailiff opened the door and called us back in, my knees nearly buckled. Nadia gave my arm a light squeeze. "Whatever happens, you did everything right." The judge's face told me everything the moment we stepped back inside. He was no longer composed, no longer neutral. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard. He cleared his throat. "Having reviewed the submitted evidence, this court finds the behavior exhibited by Mr. Sloan deeply troubling." Darren shifted. Crowley tried to speak, but the judge silenced her with a single raised hand. "The recordings clearly show an attempt to manipulate a minor into providing false testimony. Furthermore, The conversations between Mr. Sloan and Miss Whitney suggest intent to remove the child from her primary caregiver for reasons unrelated to the child's well-being. Whitney wasn't there. She hadn't come. Not since the videos had been mentioned. The court hereby awards full legal and physical custody to Miss Monroe, the judge declared. Mr. Sloan will have supervised visitation only, contingent on his completion of an approved anger management program and psychological evaluation. Ariel's fingers tightened around mine. "This is outrageous," Darren hissed. "She's manipulating." "Mr. Sloan," Judge Hanley snapped, "if you speak again out of turn, I will hold you in contempt." Crowley pulled him down by the sleeve, but the damage was done. "Children don't record their parents unless they feel unsafe," the judge continued, his voice softer now. "And what your daughter showed us today was not just a cry for help, it was a call for justice." I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. As the gavel came down, Darren stayed in his seat, shell-shocked. I stood slowly, not looking at him, not needing to. I had everything I came for. But as I gathered Ariel's things and prepared to walk out of that courtroom for the last time, Nadia leaned in close. "We're not done yet," she whispered. "Whitney's name is in those tapes too. And I have a feeling she's got more to lose than Darren ever did." "Tell them you were lying, Ariel?" His voice cracked through the courtroom like a whip, but she didn't even flinch. Ariel stood by my side, her little hand holding the edge of my sleeve. Darren had risen so fast, his chair toppled behind him, his face blotchy red, veins bulging against his temple. But my daughter, 7 years old, in her favorite blue dress with silver stars, just looked at him calmly and said, "The truth doesn't need makeup, Daddy." Silence. Not the heavy, uncertain silence we'd grown used to during these hearings. This one was sharper. Final. The kind of silence that follows a verdict already written on every face in the room. Judge Hanley leaned forward. "Mr. Sloan, you are one outburst away from contempt." Darren's attorney, now pale and visibly sweating, tugged him by the arm, but he shrugged her off, still glaring at Ariel like she'd somehow betrayed him, as if the pawn had suddenly become a queen. I reached down and gently pulled Ariel closer to me. Her head rested against my hip. My heart ached with so many feelings at once: grief, pride, exhaustion, but above all, relief. Later that week, the recordings were leaked. Not by me. I never would have done that, not even to him. But someone in the legal chain, maybe a clerk, maybe someone who thought the public deserved to know, sent them to the press. And just like that, Darren Sloan, tech golden boy, poster child for post-IPO success, fell overnight. Board members distanced themselves. His name disappeared from the website within 48 hours. The headlines wrote themselves. Founder loses custody after child's secret recordings reveal abuse, manipulation, and that quote, "The truth doesn't need makeup," was everywhere. Whitney was nowhere to be seen. Then, 2 days later, I got the notification from Mia. She filed for divorce, Mia texted. Public pressure. Her brand's tanking. I opened the article. There she was in sunglasses, flanked by her PR team, refusing to answer questions about whether she knew what Darren had done. She knew. The whole time. But I didn't care about retribution. Not really. All I cared about was Ariel finally sleeping through the night. No more wet sheets, no more hiding stuffed animals, no more flinching at the sound of keys in the door. One evening, I found her coloring on the kitchen floor. "What are you drawing, baby?" I asked. She looked up. "A house, but not Daddy's house. Ours." A week after the ruling, we got a new routine. Pancakes for dinner on Fridays, movie nights with popcorn bigger than our bowls, and a jar labeled Truth Jar, where we'd write down one honest thing about our day, even if it was scary. "I was scared in court," Ariel admitted one night, slipping a note inside. "But I knew you'd believe me." I kissed her forehead and whispered, "Always." We didn't talk about Darren much after that. He showed up for 2 supervised visits, then ghosted the parenting classes completely. Last I heard, he'd moved to a smaller condo in Los Angeles, trying to salvage his image with startup bros who still wore Patagonia vests and believed apologies on LinkedIn fixed everything. It didn't matter. He was gone. But the echo of what he tried to take from us lingered, like a shadow just outside the frame. And I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been watching everything unfold, someone who wasn't done yet. 2 months later, she started humming again. Soft little tunes under her breath while brushing her teeth or while stacking her Legos into towers taller than she was. I didn't say anything the first time I heard it, just stood quietly in the hallway, hand over my heart, listening like it was the first bird after a long, cruel winter. Ariel was smiling more, sleeping deeper. Her drawings were back to being wild explosions of purple suns and rainbow dinosaurs. She stopped checking over her shoulder when someone knocked on the door. The silence in our home no longer carried weight. It was just silence now, not fear. There was one moment that stayed with me, though. We were walking past the courthouse on our way to the park, and she glanced up at the building. "Is that where I told the truth?" she asked. I nodded. "It is." She thought for a second. "I didn't even cry." "You didn't have to," I said. "You spoke louder than anyone in that room." Judge Hanley, who now insisted everyone just call him Frank, reached out to me not long after the ruling. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about Ariel's videos, about her voice, and the system that almost chose to ignore it. "I'm drafting a new courtroom guideline," he said, "for contested custody cases involving minors. Mandatory psychological evaluation. Safe, confidential reporting channels. We're calling it the Ariel Protocol." I remember covering my mouth to keep from sobbing. Not because I needed justice anymore. We had that. But because something small and scared had turned into something that would protect others. A little girl with a pink iPad changed the law. I started volunteering again, this time at the Family Rights Alliance, mostly helping mothers who reminded me of who I used to be. Tired, cornered, questioning themselves. Sometimes I brought Ariel with me. She'd sit in the corner with her crayons and ask if she could draw something hopeful for each kid who came in. They always said yes. Whitney never reached out, and Darren never finished the classes. I heard, through the brittle grapevine of mutual acquaintances, that he tried pitching a new startup focused on digital ethics. I didn't laugh when I heard that. I didn't say anything at all. I thought forgiveness would come with time. I thought maybe someday I'd feel lighter, but the truth is, I don't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that's okay. Some wounds aren't meant to be closed, some just need to breathe. One evening while folding laundry, I heard Ariel talking in her room. At first, I thought she was on a call, but when I peeked in, she was sitting cross-legged, Mr. Bear propped up like a judge on her desk. "And that's how we won," she whispered, "because I didn't stop telling the truth, even when they didn't want to hear it." I turned away before she saw me cry. She thinks this is over, that the monsters have gone away. But part of me knows the world doesn't give permanent endings. It just gives us quiet spaces between storms. And it's in those spaces that we choose who we become next. So here's what I'll say to you. Whoever you are, wherever you're sitting, if you've ever been told your story wasn't enough, or your voice too small, I want you to remember a little girl who hid an iPad beneath her pillow and changed everything. Maybe your truth hasn't been heard yet. Maybe your fight is still ahead. But when you're ready, when you're tired of being quiet, speak. We'll be here. And if this story reached you in some small way, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or someone you love, maybe leave a comment, or a truth, or just your name. Sometimes being heard starts with being seen. And if you want to keep walking with us, one truth at a time, hit subscribe. We're not done. Not even close.